There we go. That's the recording in progress. All right, so I'm going to welcome everybody to the First Coast Free Thought Society Zoom room. The First Coast Free Thought Society is an organization of individuals who prefer science and reason over religious dogma and fanaticism. We've enjoyed the non-religious community of Northeast Florida and beyond since 1998. We are also the proud Jacksonville chapter of the American Humanist Association. We are part of the coalition for nonprofit organizations who have come together to advocate for a connective network of parks and green spaces in downtown Jacksonville called Riverfront Parks Now. And we're in the happy position to celebrate the First Coast Free Thought Society's 26th year. We are on Facebook, X, Meetup, Instagram, and YouTube. We meet in person socially through our secular Sunday gatherings in the park, our book and movie discussion groups, and sometimes at a local watering hole. The Free Thinker newsletter is published monthly, to which we invite your readership, your feedback, and your submissions. And a reminder to all contributors, submissions for our May edition are due no later than Sunday, April 28th. And we extend an invitation to all who knew Roger Curry and would like to participate in a celebration of Roger's life to be held Saturday, April 20th at Maggiano's Little Italy in the town center in Jacksonville. I'll post a link in the chat with more information. Roger was a great longtime supporter of the First Coast Free Thought Society. You may learn all about what I just mentioned at our website, fcfs.org. I do have a question for the floor. Is anyone here new to the First Coast Free Thought Society? And if you are you willing to share how you heard about us? Are you new to us? If you are, this is a good time to unmute, raise your hand, and speak up if you're new to us. If you're not new to us, that's fine. And if you don't care to share, that's also fine. Anybody care to share? Are you new? Deanna Lovino, please.
Hi, sorry, I'm driving, so that's why I'm muted and no visual. But I heard about it because of seeing the post from Farhan's talk today. So this is my first time.
Okay. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. That's good. Anybody else care to share?
I was just going to say that was my partner, Deanna Iovino. And
oh, it's an I.
It is. People do it all the time. It looks like an L, but it's an I. It just needs the caps, at both ends.
Yeah.
It's missing.
Okay. All right.
But I heard about Free Thought Society, and I've read Lance's writing, and through Lance, of course.
Well, that's terrific. Well, thank you for sharing on. I appreciate it. Anybody else care to share? Well, okay, that's great. I appreciate it. We are all volunteers here, yet we do incur some expenses, largely promotion. We are promoted online, on the radio, and in print. And in fact, today, we had several promos on WJCT, NPR, the local NPR station. Anybody by chance hear of those today? We had 4 spots run today. Anybody? Just raise your hand if you heard them. If not, I'm kind of curious. And I'm also kind of curious, what's your favorite radio station? Does anybody listen to the radio anymore?
I listen to NPR. When I'm driving, that's all I listen to.
Okay, anybody else care to share your favorite radio station? Because I'm kind of wondering, is it worthwhile to promote there?
Well, NPR is my radio has been listened to mainly for the last 20 years or so.
Okay, very good. Okay, well, thank you. We have some associated costs, but we're a 501c charitable organization. So if you can see your way clear to offering a small membership donation of $15, $20, or any dollar amount, you'll be part of the reason we're able to continue our public outreach. We're tremendously grateful for all who have made donations. We need you and we appreciate you. We look forward to a provocative lineup of exciting speakers in the next few months. For example, next month, May 20th, we're pleased to have with us Seth Andrews, a well-known, funny, favorite atheist and former Christian minister who hosts a podcast called The Thinking Atheist. Seth will ask and answer, who is the better intelligent designer, Seth Andrews or God? In June, we have scheduled Florida State Representative District 13, Angie Nixon. Sign on to our meetup page, sign up for our newsletter and our email announcements at our website. Stay in touch. If you have an idea for a speaker or any kind of a program, please let us know. Now, tonight, we welcome gender scientist Dr. Ann Goldbauer, PhD, RN, board clinical sexologist, board certified transgender care professional, who asks, what is all the hoopla with puberty blockers and trans care for kids and youth? What do we know? What do we not know? And what has gone wrong and what has gone well? Please use the Zoom hand raise feature found at the reactions button to raise your hand during the Q&A. Should you prefer, you may message a question via the Zoom chat. Let's mute our mic until it's time to speak. Please know we are recording the presentation for posterity to be uploaded later on our YouTube channel. As a side note, we are open to the public. We don't know what might be said during our discussions. Sometimes we cringe, sometimes we nod in quiet approval, and sometimes we cheer. We look forward to a robust civil discussion during our Q&A. So let's begin by appreciating Dr. Goldbauer for graciously offering us his time, expertise, and insights. So Ann, we are all yours. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I just wanted to mention that it is a highly controversial subject. It's right up there with religion, abortion, and everything else. You name it, it's heated. People are very emotional about it. And that's even among those of us who identify as trans. We're not all on the same side about many issues. We're all very different people. We have different backgrounds and different belief systems, and we're just not all the same. And I think sometimes we have to remind people of this. I'm going to turn off my video because I need to get my PowerPoint in line, and then I'll turn it back on.
Okay.
Are you able to see my screen?
We are.
Oh, that's wonderful. And anything around it, or just what's in the frame?
It's just what looks like just your screen.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so what's all the hoopla with puberty blockers and trans care for kids? Well, I will say that it isn't just trans kids who are taking puberty blockers. In some instances, we have people who have been ill. They were diagnosed with, for instance, prostate cancer, and in some cases, ovarian cancer. So we want to block the estrogen from coming through. And then also trans adults who may take some blockers because of their own organs, their sex organs, still releasing their sex hormones, and that will then permit the cross-sex hormones from doing their job. Now, they're not on it forever, but they will have periods where trans adults are prescribed puberty blockers. I want to cover the pediatric population, and that will include adolescents. And I'll make some reference to adults because some of these adolescents grow up to be adults, and I will cover some of those aspects. I teach hormones to adults, primarily mental health providers. Some are medical providers. They could be nurses, doctors, nurse practitioners, and then, of course, the insurance industry. I have people who have attended my class as well from the insurance industry. I always say that the brain is my favorite subject. It is an interesting organ, and sex originates from our brain. It influences all the areas in our brain. And so the male brain looks slightly different from the female brain. It's not more intelligent or less intelligent. There are just some slight differences. The hypothalamus is a gland, and so is the pituitary, and they work in tandem. So I always tell people, if you can think of perhaps a president that runs who runs a company and then works in tandem with the vice president, that may be one way to look at it. So they work in tandem, basically producing hormones. Then those hormones carry instructions throughout our body, not just our brain, but throughout our body. And these hormones are delivered to tissues and organs and other glands in the body. I wanted to start off with precocious puberty. I wanted to bring this in line with the discussion because I think it has a significant role. We don't always think about it in this way, because oftentimes when research is conducted on the trans community, it includes the gender diverse community, TGD as we know it. But the precocious pubertal child could be 5 years of age and start her menses. And if it's a young boy, a male, then it doesn't really make a difference because either one isn't ready for any of that. They aren't ready emotionally. And in these cases, then they've implemented puberty blockers. And if it's left untreated, then that child will never develop the height that they ordinarily would have. So they do run interference with puberty blockers. Otherwise, they end up with a short stature. There are two types of precocious puberty. There's the central type and then peripheral type. And the central type is gonadotropin dependent, and the peripheral type is gonadotropin independent. They look for example in females for any ovarian cysts. Some of them clear up on their own. They may erupt, and then there's a little bit of bleeding. Other times they look to, they have to rule out if it's that or if it's an actual period. If it is a case of cysts, then they want to rule out any malignancy. And then there are, of course, other morbidities that may accompany that child. Morbidity meaning disease. The age of onset in girls is usually before 8 years of age, and I mentioned 5-year-olds. This has been reported. And then for boys, it's just shy of 9 years. They've done a retrospective chart review. Retrospective meaning they went back. And I found this to be very interesting. I also have a keen interest in endocrine disruptors. So endocrine disruptors are anything from pesticides to the stuff that they put in our food, the additives, and then also in products. And it could also include surgical procedures, for instance, hip replacements, the material with that, and then also dental implants. And some people just don't do well with those foreign objects. Breast implants are another one. Now, this is a really interesting area of study, and we're continuously learning more and more. But for this particular study, this was because COVID-19 triggered a change in the way people live. And this study focused on idiopathic central precocious puberty, also known as ICPP, only in the pediatric female population living in New York City. It was reviewed by the Institutional Review Board of New York School of Medicine. They studied two groups and they looked at what really happened during the mandatory COVID-19 lockdown. Okay, we know that activities ceased, kids weren't playing anymore, and some kids were accustomed to playing sports every day or going to dance on a regular basis, physically active, riding their bikes, walking to school together. So it not only affected their activity, but their socialization. And then they were sitting around and they were on their phones and their tablets and their computers and gaining weight. There was stress in the family, different levels of stress, and this contributed to a huge change for many of these kids. They know that SARS-CoV-2 affected the systemic system, meaning throughout the body. But it wasn't like COVID-19. COVID-19 affected the endocrine system. This meant people with diabetes, thyroid disorders, kidney disease. It affected many areas in the endocrine system. The endocrine system includes cross-sex hormones because it affects that system. So do puberty blockers. And in this particular study, they were able to determine that mineral metabolism abnormalities contributed to obesity. They didn't just do a retrospective chart review, they also did some blood work and then some radiological work as well. So they studied the pandemic group. There were 33 subjects, all girls, and pre-pandemic group, 23 subjects. And then they did comparisons. They were able to determine that the pandemic group of girls had elevated estradiol levels and larger ovaries. Compared to the 23 subjects of the pre-pandemic group, there was a significant change. And these weren't just slightly elevated estradiol levels. They were elevated to the degree that it raised some concerns. And they were hearing from other pediatricians and endocrinologists worldwide. They were reporting the same thing. Not this outcome, but the precocious puberty onset of young girls. 38% of parents reported stress and 25% severe stress. People lost their jobs. Some ended up houseless. They were losing family and friends. And there was a lot of stress that now was being managed, or maybe not as well, within these home environments. People were using substances because people self-medicate. They were trying to cope. So that added some issues for these children as well. And so 48% of children reported moderate stress. They were fearful that they may die, or they may lose their friends or their pet. When therapists meet with these youngsters, they have to determine how distressed is this child. It's already been determined that they have an incongruence between their gender identity and their assigned sex at birth. But some children are gender variant, and that's not quite the same as a child who's fixated on their gender. Many years ago, I was so fortunate. I was filming for my documentary, and I was invited by a trans female pediatrician who shared her story with me, and it was a beautiful story. She told all her patients' parents that she was going to transition. She only lost a handful of her patients. All the others were devoted to her. Spending just a little time with her, I could see why. She was gentle, she was kind, and she's the one who told me about Gender Spectrum, genderspectrum.org in the Bay Area. Of course, I was out in California, not in the Bay Area at the time. I was out in the Sacramento area. And so I went, and I went 3 times and loved it. And I loved it because, first of all, it was held at a Catholic church, or a Catholic school. I would have never thought that it would have been, but it has in previous years. And I got to meet people from all over the world. There were hundreds of people, hundreds of these families with these children of all ages. It served a wonderful purpose for professionals like myself. So we got to embark on taking training and meeting some of the trainers. And then the adolescents got to also do some training. They were well equipped by that time. They had been, many of them, her sisters since very little. And then there were the little kids and the siblings, and everybody got to connect with other people from all over the world. It was just a wonderful experience. I want to cover the intersex, the gender diverse, and the transgender population. Intersex has a medical term. A lot of intersex people don't care for the term. They feel, look, I may be intersex, but I'm part of the human race, and I'm not an anomaly. Please just accept me for who I am. I'm just like you. The medical term is disorders of sex development. And the reason for that is because at times they've had to perform repairs, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So some people prefer the term differences of sex development. But either way, people are born with either or both reproductive or sexual anatomy outside of their usual male-female types, and not always, but sometimes they may have both expressions, both characteristics. The intersex population comprises of about 2%, and right up there with redheads. And I believe left-hand people are about 1% or just over that. This is the most common type. It's known as CAH. You're not going to remember any of this. Don't even worry about it, but just be aware of it. And I want you to be aware of it. So some of these children who have congenital adrenal hyperplasia or hypoplasia may be born needing repairs, not alterations, just repairs. For instance, a little boy, a little infant, may have a slit on the side of his penis, or on top of the penis, or on the bottom of the penis. So they will go in at some point in time and repair that. A little girl may have a clitoris that is off center, so they may want to put that in line. And again, that's a repair. Some of these intersex individuals grew up and they became doctors, surgeons, lawyers, brick masons. They were everybody under the sun, just like any of us. And they said, look, stop it already. Stop changing the sex of those of us who are diagnosed as intersex. Give us a chance. We'll figure it out. We didn't have that chance. And it really made our lives very difficult. We were turned into boys when we weren't boys, we were girls. We were turned into girls when we weren't girls, we were boys. So stop it all. Don't do any more than what you've done. Repairs, yes, but none of this changing our sex. Leave it up to us to tell you. So people say, how's that possible? What do I call my child? What pronoun do I use? I want you to think about, as I keep talking, about how we socialize little ones from the time they come into the world. And you'll probably be able to answer this question, but I'll come back to it. There are different types of intersex. I've heard it mentioned that there are 40 types of variances, all the way to the extreme of 80. And I was interviewing a pediatric endocrinologist at UCSF in San Francisco at Children's Benoist Hospital. And he frowned when I told him, oh, I had heard 80. And he wasn't buying that. And so I put that to the side and kept my mind open, realizing that we're still making discoveries. The androgen insensitive syndrome, AIS as it's known, and Turner syndrome, they won't start puberty until much later, way beyond when a child who doesn't have this intersex type would start puberty. Swyer syndrome, no puberty, it will never come. So they do need hormone replacement therapy, or it won't start. Sometimes our receptor sites are asleep, as I like to put it. It's not medically correct, but it'll give you a sense of why these things happen. So sometimes we have to wake them up to say, come on, do your job. Here's a little dose. Let's get you going. It's not to change the gender. It's to wake up the sex hormone that already exists, that's in them. We have receptor sites, but not all of them work. Some areas will never receive the hormone. And so sometimes we have to tell kids, whoa, slow down a little bit. Here's what we need to talk about. Do you have hairy men in your family? You don't? Okay, then you're probably not going to be hairy. Do you have large-breasted women in your family? No? Probably not going to have large breasts. So we try to talk with adolescents one-on-one to explain to them that hormones aren't going to produce miracles. And we want to make sure that they're very clear about that, because we don't know what they're picturing, right? They may picture themselves to be a particular female or particular male, and it may not work out for them. And we want to make sure that they are fully on board and understand that. We have these other types who also don't start their menses. And then boys who, with some of these types, variances, if you want to call it, that variance types, they may develop some breast tissue, or it may be more than what they were going to grow with. And if they hadn't had this variance type, and then some girls who will have lower voices and some facial hair. Gender variant kids are fluid. They may one day feel very girly, very femme, another day very masculine, boyish. They will have variations of how they dress, perhaps, or not, or their attractions to sports versus maybe the artistic world, and who genders those. Depends on where you live in the world and a lot of times it's society, right? Society does the gendering, establishes what's normal, what's acceptable for boys and girls. Some are just somewhat fluid. They may be very close in proximity. Others don't want to have anything to do with the identity, anybody's identity. They just want their own, whatever that may be. It's not going to be boy, girl, man, woman. And they've existed for eons. If you go back in history, as early as 1200s, people have been around for eons, identifying outside of the binary. Social transition, though, there was a study done at University of Manchester in their research division that was done on gender variant children. They finished the study and said, look, 84% of these youngsters, by the time they hit puberty, they were aligning with their assigned sex at birth. There was another study done, and I didn't include it in here. You can always run the query. The study that was done was on boys who didn't end up identifying as trans or going on to transition. A small percentage of them went on to same-sex attractions. Transgender, who are the trans people in the world? Well, we refer to them as persisters. And I will tell you, they can be as young as 2 years of age. So I'm going to go back now to the earlier statement of adults who are just perplexed at how a 2-year-old could possibly know their gender. And I always say, really? If you think about it, we have the ultrasound. We have, well, back in my day, it was baby showers. Now we have gender reveal parties. And we've already decided, based on the assigned sex of this, whether it's prior to birth or upon birth of this child, we have already decided who they are, because we socialize based on what we know, what we're comfortable with. If it's a boy, we've already socialized them. That infant comes home, the process has already started, and most likely before that. By the time this little tyke is 2, I can guarantee you they know who they are as far as their body parts. They've already studied them. It's around the age where they do that. And they know that they're a boy or a girl. The difference, though, is they're not fixated. So you could probably put a boy in a pink outfit. They're not going to care. Maybe, maybe not. And a girl, maybe in who knows what. And they're not going to care. But the persister is going to care. The persister, I can guarantee you, is never going to go away. They will not change their minds. They are here to stay. Some exceptions exist, and I'm not going to focus on those exceptions. I want to focus on the ideal family. The exceptions are domestic violence, very strict environment, consequences if that child continues to persist. I read of one case, came across it on my phone looking at the news, and it was a case of a boyfriend who murdered his girlfriend's 2-year-old son because he was effeminate. Does this happen? Yes, it does. And I don't want to focus on those at all. I know they exist. I just wanted to raise your awareness that they do exist. I want to focus on the perfect scenario of this child who has the infrastructure of love and support and the community behind them. So it starts off with, I'm going to choose now the 2-year-old persister. And they are socialized most likely at home. Then they go on to preschool. And now they have to join another social group. Things will change a little bit for this child. The parents will probably have to do some advocating and preparing. And then, of course, the child goes on to elementary school. And now there's another social group they have to assimilate in. Every time there's a change, they have to get ready for that. Parents as well. And so do the siblings. When I was filming interviews, I heard stories of children writing to God, asking God to please turn them into a boy. Please, dear God, turn me into a boy. There were children who had drawings. I have some of these drawings. I was able to photograph them. And they were really powerful. Drawings of how they saw themselves. In one case, a little boy dressed or drew princesses, loved princesses. He was a princess. In many of these cases, depending on, I suppose, your religious upbringing, some were writing Santa Claus, begging Santa Claus to please turn them into a little girl. And I'll be good. I'll be good. I'll help around the house. I will. I'll behave. They were bargaining early on. And in some of these cases, as these youngsters grew up, when they took showers, they covered their body parts. And if they were a boy, identifying as a girl, they would wear shorts and a top so that they could feel like a girl. Some of these parents ended up divorced. There was a lot of fighting and arguing and blaming. It's our role as trans professionals to provide a different type of environment to help people not blame one another, to help them understand what is happening. It's a very strong sense that a cisgender person who isn't trans doesn't really understand unless they've been exposed to it through a friend or a family member or a parent. It can be very hard for people to wrap their brains around this. We would love to see more models of care around the US and the world. There are some wonderful programs that have models of care, and it really does need to be a model of care. No one should operate as a silo. It's too difficult. I've always said, when you're gay and you come out, your family comes out. When you're trans and you come out, your family comes out. They may remain stealth for a while. They may have rules about what you can and can't do, how you can behave or not behave, who you can be seen with or not seen with. But eventually they come out. And if they don't, it's a fractured relationship. And parents and siblings have lost connection with one another. It's a hefty price to pay. And it's very hard for the trans person who is now grown up, who so badly just wants connection. So we need a pediatrician, pediatric endocrinologist, and any of these individuals who can be there to provide therapy and direction. Sometimes the radiologist must be involved. and of course, individual, family, and group support throughout the entire time. And the reason for that is because, and I don't remember the gentleman's name, was a young trans male who said, it's always about the broken arm syndrome. Every time we cry, we don't feel happy. It's the hormone that caused it. If we're not feeling well, oh, it has to be the hormone. You better get off those hormones. They're causing you problems. And we refer to that as the broken arm syndrome. Not everything relates to the hormone treatment. Many times, things happen to people. They may have lost a friendship, lost a job, or maybe they're getting married. Stress, good as well as challenging. So we always want to see the model of care because they may want to check in with their family therapist to say, it's affecting my family or my partner. I'm going through a lot right now. And I just need to talk about this. I just want them to understand what's going on in my world and that it's not the hormones. It's not that at all. And maybe in some cases it is. When would that be? Well, this is why we do a history and physical. A history and physical is done because there may be autoimmune illnesses in their family. Maybe lupus, maybe multiple sclerosis, Sjogren's syndrome, maybe diabetes. I mean, we always say, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Would this individual have started any of these illnesses? Would they have had them had we not started the hormone treatment? Maybe, maybe not. Some people have had to make very difficult decisions and they've had to stop hormone treatment because they got so ill. Because the hormone treatment was just exacerbating the illness. Did they stop the treatment permanently? No. Some, it was temporary until they were able to get on the other side of it. Others, it didn't matter how that illness was treated, they still couldn't go back to the hormone. We can refer to these people, some of these people, as detransitioners. You may have heard about them. Others may have detransitioned for other reasons. And I'll get into that in a little bit. We do want to know, all right, who has cancer in their family, bone disease? Because if we start puberty blockers, we need to know these things. And of course, just knowing the intersex variances, if known. We don't always know. Sometimes the couple has been through some testing and now they're sitting in front of the medical doctor and the medical doctor tells them, all right, here's the deal. You're actually an intersex individual. You don't have ovaries. You have testes. By the way, ovaries used to be referred to as testes. And then at some point it changed because I suppose for differentiation purposes. And so it became ovaries, like as in testes, ovaries because they produce ova. And mental health diagnoses are looked at as well, because in some of these instances, we know that hormones affect mood, how we feel, not always negative, but they do affect mood and how we feel. As they do, even if we weren't transitioning, it's normal. But if there's a mental health diagnosis in the family, and now the adolescent is diagnosed with, well, I'll name one of them, bipolar disorder. Question comes up, chicken or egg, which came first? Don't know. Do we have to taper down? Sure, let's taper down and see if it doesn't improve. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Do we tell the adolescent you can't be trans? No, of course not. It's done. They're trans. That's not going away. So we treat them. But it's to raise awareness that some of these disorders are unleashed, but we don't know if they would have unleashed regardless of whether or not they would have transitioned. I always want to keep that in check. We need more research. We need available research. We need research that can give us numbers and follow longitudinal studies. Some of these are being done. Some of them have been done. And we need to continue pushing for more research. This is a fairly new field, even though we've been around since .1. We've been around forever. But it is fairly new. It has a lot of controversy and a lot of, I think, misinformation. And we have to be able to talk about this because people wear their emotions on their sleeve. It's very, very difficult for some people. I always want to remind people that when you're in a place of privilege, you have to remember there are people who aren't. They may have been marginalized from very early on. So some of them are traumatized. Some of them have been through tremendous struggles. Doesn't mean they haven't overcome them. And some are triggered. They're sick and tired of people saying to them, prove to me you're trans. Prove it. And every step of the way, they have to prove who they are. It's emotionally draining. It's mentally fatiguing. And some individuals don't cope well with that. They're angry. They're fed up. They don't want it anymore. And we're at odds in this time of life with each other. I'm an academic. I like research. Somebody sent me a packet of research, and I was so appreciative. I had looked through it, read through it, and I like the good, the bad, and the ugly. That informs me. That's how I get better at what I do. I don't slam the door shut because I don't like what I hear. I have to be open to hearing from everyone. That is important to me. When we look at puberty blockers, we are looking at Tanner staging. It's the sexual maturation that takes place. And there are charts. You can go online and look at them. There are a number of them. And they're very helpful. I put one together. It's not quite what you may see online, but it gives you a sense of what the stages are. So we know that there's minimal changes in stage 1. You're not going to see much. Stage 2 is the prepubescent stage. That is the ideal time to introduce puberty blockers. Stage 3 is a little more obvious. Some kids enter stage 3 or they're right on the hub of that, and they start puberty blockers. Stage 4, the puberty is in full gear. And stage 5, it's just finalizing all the little ends. And then it's done. And they move into adulthood. Prescriptions, as I said, begin at Tanner stage 2. Some people enter the Tanner stage 3, depending on their availability and also their finances, and if their insurance company covers them, because they're not cheap. They're costly. Tanner stage 2, we may see some slight budding of the female breast, and the male will have some slight changes in their size of their testicle, the volume of their testicles, and their penis will start to enlarge. Now, it's usually described as puberty blocker will stop the delivery of sex hormones. Yes and no. Yes and no. It's an easy way to explain it. There still is a small amount of hormone that is delivered. We can't do without our sex hormones. We need them. Our brain needs them to function, and our bodies need to function. They're not FDA approved, but the FDA has said that Lupron, when it was prescribed in 1993, it was as early as that, for precocious puberty, they said that Lupron was safe. There are many different types, and they all come with different costs. When I say that we never stop really making hormones, we don't, unless there's maybe a time in life we hit the menopausal phase. By the way, men also experience menopause. But unless we have a variance type, or we have precocious puberty, or something of that nature, if we walk the same pathway, take the same trajectory as everybody else, the hormone blockers, as it's called in adults, puberty blockers in children, slow it down. It decreases the amounts that are released. Very, very little amounts that aren't going to affect much change in the development of sex organs and glands. The hypothalamus is a powerful gland. It's a magnificent gland. It keeps us balanced, and it releases gonadotropin, which releases hormones. And all of them communicate with one another, all these glands. And the way that I like to share this is during puberty, if the child was not put on puberty blockers, the gonadotropin or releasing hormone would send a message through a pulsating action. And that pulsating signal is received by the pituitary gland, which is known as the master gland. And that is what tells the master gland, the pituitary gland, to make luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Boys and girls need this. And then the gonadotropins send messages to the ovaries or the testes to make estrogen or testosterone. What a puberty blocker does, it repeats the same exact motion, except it doesn't send pulsating signals. It's a steady signal. That steady signal is not recognized by the pituitary gland. So it doesn't receive the signal, and it's not going to make luteinizing hormone or follicle stimulating hormone. It's not going to happen. But we still have hormones. Sex hormones don't just go away. We just have a fewer amounts of them. This came off of Mayo Clinic's online site. So the side effects are, some people experience swelling at the injection site. There might be some weight gain, hot flashes, very similar to those of us who have experienced them, headaches, and mood changes. Because you have to remember, estrogen and testosterone, they play a role in how we feel and how we respond. That is so important to remember. Estrogen has been shown to affect our balance, which oftentimes in menopausal females, they may complain that they don't have good balance, not like they used to. Same with the males. They help in restoring when we have them, our ability to navigate spatial, parking the car maybe, or backing it up. It all matters. Some people are really good at it and other people just aren't. It doesn't mean they don't have sufficient estrogen, but they most likely will complain about spatial awareness declining. And that is why when we get older, we may be prone to tripping or falling. It's one of the reasons. The complications on Mayo's website are the effects on growth, bone growth, as well as bone density. And fertility, well, that depends on when the medicine was started. So let's go back to the precocious pubertal child who may have started her period around age 5. I don't know for how long they would implement puberty blockers. I suppose it would depend on the response. And maybe, again, I'm not talking medical, just as a layperson to a layperson. Even though I am medical, I just want to make sure that it's well understood that in these cases, I want you to think about our cells and all of our cells in our glands everywhere, in our brain everywhere, organs, you name it, have memory. And some of this memory is old, very old memory, which goes back to our limbic brain. It's the oldest memory bank in the world, right? So we want to make sure that when we hear statements made, oh, it causes infertility, that we really have all the pieces that we need to examine that. Sometimes we receive information from people who read research and they don't really understand what they're reading. So they get the gist of it, and then we hear about it, and then off we go. This is where research is needed. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health, I'm a member of WPATH, and I know a number of other people who are, and they're always conducting training and having conversations and reaching out to one another, because the whole purpose behind WPATH was to provide providers with standards of care. They're not law, they're just standards to offer some direction to people. And they have a membership that's worldwide. People from all over the world are part of this WPATH. And I know there were some files released, and there were some heated discussions about these files. And I just wanted to, I just needed to say this, that when medical people have conversations with one another, we don't talk the same way as when we speak to lay people. It wouldn't make sense to do that. So in one of the videos that was released, I happen to know the one individual, have a tremendous regard for him. He has spent years contributing to WPATH. It's all volunteer. Everybody who serves there is a volunteer. They train, they participate, they weigh in. And in this particular situation, I could just see it playing out, that it was probably a training and a question was posed, and they went to respond among each other. It's called the Delphi technique. The Delphi technique is it's a style of research where everyone comes together and says, are you seeing this? I didn't have that experience. What about you? And then there's a consensus. And that's very important to have that consensus. And I thought, well, maybe it was something to the effect of, well, are you able to talk to a young person about sex, about fertility? I'm not translating it exactly, but it was something along these lines. And of course, it's hard to talk to a prepubescent child about fertility. They're not going to talk about that. They're not there. That's not their headspace. Would it be possible to talk to them as they get older? Yes, absolutely. But I think those were some of the components that were missing from that example. Did people feel deceived? Did they feel that information was hidden? Possibly. I think some of that was verbalized. I think there were some concerns with the fact that they didn't respond soon enough. I just think that we have to remember they have been doing research. I happen to know one of the endocrinologists who, since 2020, is part of a longitudinal study team, and they are looking at the effects of puberty blockers. But it's this information that doesn't always get out there to the public. Are there people who are part of WPATH who have expressed concern about puberty blockers? Absolutely. Yes, there are. And again, it's not an agency that polices surgeons or medical doctors. They're a volunteer organization, and they offer standards of care. I get their volumes all the time. I just hope that we could all learn from this and we can move forward and improve what areas may need to be answered. And I think the more research we can conduct over a long period, the more informed we'll be. So I mentioned the growth on bones. Bone density is measured. The child's height is measured, their weight is taken, lab work is done, and the DEXA scan then measures their thickness and strength of their bones. And this is done, hopefully, on every child before they start puberty blockers so that they have a baseline. And then it's done every 1 to 2 years. And in fact, they recommend that it should be done in trans adults as well, who take cross-sex hormones or gender-affirming hormones. It's a 2D technique. It's not perfect. So then they will not always, it's not always on their radar. I don't think it's typically ordered, but they will go through a bone mineral apparent density test, which will calculate the estimated volume of the bone mineral density, because it plays a vital role in building bones. They have to have a normal score before concern kicks in. And if it falls below these numbers, -1, and in between -1 and -2.5, then they go on to develop osteopenia, which is the precursor to osteoporosis. Again, it's a question of which came first, the chicken or the egg. Well, we don't know. If the history wasn't known with this child, do we have poor historians who don't know their family's history? Yes, we do. And this could be the case of maybe, and I don't know if I mentioned this before. If I did, just let me know. This could be a case of a child who's adopted and they came from a war zone and all their history, everything has been wiped out. There isn't anything available to inform the medical world about their family history. So is it possible that they would have developed osteopenia or been prone to it? Possible. Would they have had fractures with or without puberty blockers? Possible. And I think this is why it's so important that we have this research and that children are entered into research studies, because then those studies inform us so we can do a better job. We can elevate our standards. And that would spare a lot of anxiety in people who may have a child who has taken puberty blockers, and then hearing all the information could be triggering. But the rationale behind it is, look, we're receiving information and we're also hearing from some people who, as children, took puberty blockers. Some did fine, but some went on to develop symptoms that were disabling. And I think we have to pay attention to both worlds. The epiphyseal growth plate does not exist in adults. It exists in children and adolescents. These are your long bones, your arms and your legs. And that growth plate will eventually fuse. And when it does, it may receive a border, and then it eventually thins out and it's barely visible. There was a 2022 study, you can take a screenshot of this and look into it, that had an impact of gender affirming treatment on bone health in transgender and gender diverse youth. And this study looked at all of that. I'm not going to go into all of it. I've already mentioned some of the concerns, and you can review it in your own time. But the epiphyseal growth plate does close at some point. And so for girls, it's around 14 and 15, but as young as 12. And then in boys, as young as 14. So we go back to thinking of the precocious pubertal child who started her period at age 5. And when will her growth plate close? So we want to make sure that we're always weighing the risks and the benefits. The effects on the skeleton, they know, will eventually show that at the lumbar spine, when they start cross-sex hormones or gender-affirming hormones, GAH, that there will be thinning of the bones, and also the spine will have only partially restored. Again, what effects will that have? And do we have that information? And on how many people do we have that information? Some people did experience thinning of the bones and blood clotting because of the effects of pubertal blockers. All right, so when somebody stops taking puberty blockers and they don't go on to the gender affirming hormones, then what? Well, it's presumed that they will go on to start puberty. They'll go into puberty. And again, maybe not. It depends on, do they even know if they're intersex? Not everybody has those studies. They're expensive. Genetic studies are expensive. Maybe they have Swayer's syndrome if they're female bodied. And they're seeking transitioning as males. What then? Again, we need more studies. In those who did go on to start puberty, they know that it varied. Some were able to, in a relatively short period of time, and others it took a little longer. And I imagine that maybe some of the receptor sites had to be awakened. Maybe they had to have a boost of their hormones. Again, it's going to vary. In some of these kids or adolescents who don't go on to cross-sex hormones or gender-affirming hormones, they may be transgender in their identity, male, female, gender diverse, or not. Not everybody continues to go on. Again, it's a wide range of differences within our population. Some individuals wanted to know how soon would they start their menses. Some, it's a few weeks and maybe sooner. We know that if we didn't have the puberty blockers as children, what would happen if this adolescent experienced puberty? Well, we know they will have bone development because that's the role of estrogen and androgens. They're responsible for bone growth, strengthening the bones. And they will also, in their formative years as adolescents, they'll develop critical thinking skills. They know it has an effect on the brain. And they'll have a higher level to have the ability to introspect, to look within and think about things, think about themselves, how they feel about the world. Puberty blockers for 2 years, and this was back in 2015, back then, ran between $20,000 and $40,000. I've read as high as $165,000. It's very expensive. It's not affordable by those who are on public aid. So what does that mean? What happens to those kids? And that's the world that we're looking at. Can we offer them a supportive model? Probably. Why not? Of course we could. Are there advocates saying this is so unfair? Yes, they are out there and not happy about this because it reeks of classism. It's okay for one group, but not the other. Was it strategic in the sense that the laws have kicked in so timely in the recent couple of years? Who knows why laws are passed? Are they really passed because there's concern for the child? Are they passed because of financial reasons? I will leave that up to you to think about. I'm not here to persuade you. I'm only here to give you two sides of the coin, and then you can make up your mind. This came from one of WPATH's volumes, and you can look into it. It's, I'm sure, available for some of you if you run the queries. Maybe not this particular volume, but certainly the information. Research methodologies have been done to look at the neurodevelopment. How does the brain respond when children are put on pubertal blockers? What happens? And that process is now in progress, and they're looking at researching for a long period. There was this journalist, Danielle Prieur, I presume her name is pronounced, who interviewed a doctor and said that there were some disgruntled, I think, statements, not disgruntled, but upset. The doctor was upset and said, look, it's really frustrating that our governor, Ron DeSantis, has made this announcement preventing patients on Medicaid accessing hormones, puberty blockers, and possibly going on to gender affirming surgery and then having that revoked, having it stopped. And his comment was, could you imagine starting a kid on chemotherapy for a cancer they have, and then it's working really well, and then we get 10% of the way, and then it's stopped. And now we say, sorry, we're stopping it, not because we don't think it works, but because some policy says we can't. Much controversy. The individual who sent me these lit reviews, I thought I would include a couple of them. This was a study from Finland. All-cause and suicide mortalities among adolescents and young adults who contacted specialized gender identity services in Finland from 1996 through 2019 were put through a Cox regression model, meaning cause and effect. And it was determined that clinical GD, gender dysphoria, is not predictive of all cause nor suicide mortality with a history of psychiatric treatment. In other words, the message is that regardless, we have to implement therapeutic services. It's building that child's infrastructure. It's arming the family with support. The effects of gender affirming care are not known in the TG population for suicide risk, is what it said. But in later studies, they were also able to determine, when they looked at groups, they looked at the transgender group with psychiatric diagnoses, the cisgender group with psychiatric diagnoses, the transgender group with psychiatric diagnoses received treatment. And then I think it was done over maybe 9 or 13 years. And then they reviewed and they were able to determine that they were very close, hand in hand, with hormones. So they felt, okay, the hormones didn't improve the psychiatric condition any more than in this group, who are not transgender, any more than theirs was. It's something to review, something to look at, it's something to discuss, and I think it's important. I have a bit of a different take on that when, as a trans person, we don't have surgery. Now I'm an adult and I'm going on nearly 70. In a couple of years, I'll be 70 years old. And I'm solid in who I am, but a youngster isn't. So if they did have presentations of psychiatric diagnoses, are they onto something? Possibly. Is it maybe because these youngsters hadn't gone on to surgically transition? I don't know. And I think that's the piece that's missing for me. I'm not disputing that what they were reporting and seeing was what they were reporting. I mean, what they were seeing. I think we need to pay attention to it. But part of me can't help but think, okay, but they didn't have surgery yet. So what if they had had surgery? What then? So now I will come back to the detransitioners because I think that's important to talk about. So detransitioners aren't all alike. We don't have enough data yet. I have a student who's actually looking at some components of treatment. I know that there are some academics who are running research on this population. we don't really know if the majority of detransitioners have regret, or if the majority of detransitioners stopped transitioning because they had social anxiety, they weren't accepted, and it was difficult, or if the majority of transitioners stopped transitioning because of health-related matters. We don't know enough. And this is the information that we need. And then I'll read one more slide, and that is 2/3 of children who were referred to the gender identity services presented with diagnosable mental health morbidities meaning a diagnosis, a disease, a disorder. They had depression, some had anxiety, others were on the spectrum. And of adults seeking gender affirming care, they were able to determine 30 to 40% of them presented with any of those diagnoses, and 60 to 80% had them for a lifetime. If you have any questions about surgery, I can answer some of them with somebody who's been on puberty blockers to see how that worked out, but I think I have overrun my time. Haven't I, Ken?
You're doing great. You're doing great, Ann. I appreciate it. Maybe if you're done with your slides, maybe you could take your slides. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. That enables me to see our group. And Ann, let's open this. First, let me thank you personally for that well thought out presentation on a very difficult subject that I'm certain many of us, if not most of us, don't know much about. And we learned, if you weren't paying attention, you didn't learn anything. But if you were paying attention, it was impossible not to learn something. So are there questions? If you do have a question, please raise your emoji hand and we'll set up a queue and we'll go from there. If you have no questions, I'll begin the question. Okay, we do. We have Christina, she, he. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was wondering, I'm sorry I'm late. Can I get the recording of this?
Yes, that's absolutely a good question. And this recording will be posted on our YouTube page, which is downloadable to you or anybody, and it will also be posted to our website. So, but it's not going to be immediate. It'll be probably tomorrow or the day after.
Okay, can you put that in the chat, the link to it?
Yes, I can, and I will. I will do that for you. Anything else? Okay, good. David.
Okay, thank you for your talk. And it was very informative and answered many questions that I have. I still have many questions. I'm just gonna pose one now. I had read years ago that I guess in the 20th century, let's say, I don't know if it's in the latter half of the 20th century, that for a variety of reasons, and it wasn't clear, there was still controversy about it, that in general, in the general population, the age of the onset of puberty was getting lower and lower and lower over time. So that whereas, I don't know, maybe 150 years ago, people would start puberty when they were 16, and then now they're starting when they're 12, whatever the case is. And when I think about that, to the extent that I can rely on that information, but I also think about the turbulence of adolescence, and for a lot of people, adolescence is not an easy time, including questions of gender identity, etc. And I've seen a wide variety of situations among people I know regarding that. It would seem to me that with the average person entering into puberty at a younger age than, say, 100 years ago or 150 years ago, added on to all of the just normal psychological problems, social problems that one has at an adolescent, that has to complicate decisions about when to intervene when it seems to be the case that somebody is saying, no, I really think I ought to, I'm male, but I really feel female and want to go that way. It's probably hard enough to determine in the first place, but that should complicate matters even more, I would think. So I'm just going to leave it there and see what you have to say about that.
So we know that we are seeing the early onset of puberty, and the thought is that it's all the junk, the additives that we're putting in our products. That's one thought. Endocrine disruptors, as I mentioned earlier. I don't know if you heard that, David. The endocrine disruptors are anything from what shampoo we use to what soap are we using. Do we use cleaning products? And so this is being studied. There is a university in, it's Tulane, University of Tulane, 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 Louisiana.
That's where I got my PhD.
Ah, there you go. Well, they've done an excellent job covering this concern. And I know there are now some other universities doing the same thing. And it really is eye-opening. We have to wonder, because for instance, in Europe, if you look at food products that list their ingredients, not the natural ingredients, the additives, and then you look at the US food products with their listed ingredients, we have way more. And so the question is why? Why do we have to have all these ingredients when in Europe they got rid of them for reasons of concern? Are kids in some of these countries in Europe, are they starting their puberty early? I don't know, David. But I think that would be a fair question to ask, to look into, to say, okay, maybe we have something we need to adjust at our end, or maybe it's happening everywhere. I don't have the answer.
David, you okay with that? You got a follow-up?
Not for the moment. I might come back. We'll see
Okay.
what the other questions are.
Thank
Did
you.
I answer all your questions, David?
Well, I was more concerned with how knowledge that the average age of puberty seems to be going down, and that's a trend. When you combine that with the, as I said, the turbulence, psychological, social turbulence of adolescence, I'm wondering to what extent, as a professional, you're thinking that complicates your ability to actually determine when you should intervene, etc. Is it, if people are entering puberty earlier, and entering puberty seems to be a trigger for all of those psychological problems in adolescence.
I've got you.
People are even younger, and therefore they're even less capable of coping.
Yes.
And so that has to complicate your
It does
ability to make
complicate
decisions.
Yes, it does complicate matters, because we know that estrogen and androgens play a role in our brain, and they affect our mood. They affect our decision making, because obviously it's mental health. And we have our old dinosaur brain, as I always tell my grandchildren. I always say to them, that's your dinosaur brain. That doesn't belong inside. That dinosaur belongs outside. Get that dinosaur outside. It's really, I think, recognizing that our old brain, our limbic system, has the ability to communicate to us if we have the emotional capacity, right, to understand what is happening to our bodies and what emergencies may arise. So we have our amygdala, which it's a tremendous powerful part of our brain, and it stores all recent memory, all the recent stuff. And how do young individuals process all these operations? I describe the brain as the tower with all these departments, and all these departments have roles, and they communicate with one another. And it's very important for us to ask those questions, because we know with precocious pubertal children, if they're 5 or 7 or 8 years old and they're starting their puberty, they're not going to manage it as well as an older child, perhaps at age 12, or it hinges on those variations as well. But also other factors have a strong role that we need to also address, which is, does that child have an infrastructure? Is their home environment supportive? And if those areas are lacking, they could have a more difficult time. Again, I suppose it depends on our social structure. Where are we in the world? Are we part of a tribe? Would we be supported differently? Better, maybe? Or are we part of a socialized group of individuals who are too busy to take the time to work with the child? So, David, yes, it would affect them.
Thank you for that, On. And let's go to Lance. Lance Stoll from Thailand, by the way. Go ahead, Lance.
What Anne was just saying was very much what my question was going to be. Is he talked about the role of hormones with reference to depression and suicidal ideation, and I was wondering about the role of social acceptance and the lack of religious bias on the same thing. In other words, there's a biological cause perhaps, but there's also a social cause that maybe, in my feeling, may be stronger.
Yes. When I mentioned the example of the persister, if they have a solid infrastructure that supports them, compared to the persister who may have different circumstances, and it may be a very strict religious upbringing, and there are consequences. They will process their identity or sharing that part about themselves very differently. It won't be the same outcome. It can't be. Their existence isn't that of the other who has the privilege of having support from their family and their community. But the child who is reminded that whatever the religion is, that they're living in sin or there will be consequences, that will have a different outcome for that child.
I would expect so. Yeah, here in Thailand, where the transition is very much accepted, I would expect that the suicide rates and such are much lower than you would find in the United States.
Yeah, I don't know. That's all the stuff I'm just so curious about, because, we hear a lot about that. And
Mhm.
then we have studies from Norway and Finland, and they're saying, no, they're still exhibiting these struggles, or they're still living with these diagnoses. My question is, what is occurring in the home? Do they have support? If so, again, I always mention, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Would it have existed regardless? And I don't think we have enough information to be able to determine that.
So
Um,
it just supports your idea that more research needs to be conducted on a medical and a sociological basis.
Yes.
Right. I enjoy the term the persister, people who won't change their mind. And then, Michael, we're going to come to you. But I have one quick question relative to the persister, and then another comment later in the meeting about the chicken and the egg. But the persister, are there any stats that describe people who have regrets in transitioning, people who have felt they made a mistake?
That is what we need. We need those statistics. We don't have them. We do have 2 studies taking place, one from the Netherlands, which is a whole new study involving, I believe, even individuals from the US. And we have an academic, also, I think he's from Canada, and he's also conducting a study on detransitioners. We do not know what the stats are. Are there detransitioners who say they have regret? Yes. We need to know why. Did some of them have bad outcomes? Did some of them struggle with not being able to be accepted? Was the socialization of their world difficult for them? I always, and I never like to make it about me, but I will use myself as an example. I've been on and off hormones for medical reasons, not because of the hormone, but because of other things. And so I don't have a very low voice, and I'm aware of it. And some people will clock me and they get me right, and other people won't. As I said earlier, I'm older and I go with the flow. Here's what happened. I go to a doctor's visit. I receive, and this is one of these examples, I receive my form that I have to fill out, which I did. And I said to the person who was helping me, you have gender on the form. That's really wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate that. But you don't have sex. And I need my doctor to know that my biological sex, my assigned sex at birth, is female. I haven't had surgery. So I still have my female parts. That matters. It matters because of medical reasons. And it was important for me. So when I went back later, I was online and I looked up my information. I was marked as having the biological sex of a male. And I thought, oh boy, I'm going to have to go back there at the next visit and straighten that out and have that conversation all over again. These are the things that happen to people. So if you have a person who experiences this after they've transitioned and they experience it, not me, I just ignore people, and they experience it day in and day out.
All right. Now, Michael.
That could be very difficult for them.
Oh,
And that could be, I mean, I don't want to interject. Why did somebody detransition? It wouldn't necessarily be the reason why, if I detransitioned, that would be the reason. I'm just saying we need more research.
agreed. Michael, you're up. Unmute yourself.
Thank you for your presentation. How would you respond to somebody who claims that children cannot consent to puberty blockers?
Depends on their age. So I always caution people, if you are not trans and you don't have that lived experience and you haven't had a family member, a parent, a sibling, a friend, I'm always cautious about telling parents what they can and can't do. I know this is a really heated subject. I'm not talking about parents who are cruel or they're abusive. I'm not talking about those individuals. I'm talking about a family who are concerned. They've read various things, they've done some research, and they don't know what direction to take. And they have a child who is this persister. They know that the child is unhappy, wants, maybe happy, but wants so badly, wants this body of male, female. I always remind people, look, unless you have the lived experience and you haven't been through any of that, be very careful. Please try to be quiet, because they are living with these set of circumstances day in and day out. I'm not. I mean, I may be trans, but I'm not living it. They are. And parents have to be able to make decisions. They have to be able to talk with their pediatrician. A good pediatrician will talk with them. I have a real concern about the informed consent. Some people view it as just another paper, and it basically has become that. It's another paper or a digital pad that we sign and we agree to, and most people don't even know what they're agreeing to. Quite frankly, they don't even understand the medical terminology. And then it ends there. In a good model of care, a good pediatrician would spend the time with the parents and the child. Where it's gone a little haywire is when parents were told, if you don't go along with this, your child will commit suicide. Do you want your child to commit suicide? What do you think a parent's going to say? No, I don't want my child committing suicide. I don't think that's protocol. I don't know why it came down to that, because we really don't know. Have children committed suicide? Yes. Yes, they have. How many? I don't know. And was it because they couldn't transition? Possibly. There's a documentary out. You can check it out. It's on Prime, if you have Prime. Documentary done in Australia. It was done by a journalist, and it touches on these issues. And one set of parents did experience a loss. The child did die by suicide, and they were very angry with the system because the system had their child on a 4-year waiting list. They kept going back and asking for services. They kept asking for support, direction, help us, please. We don't know what to do. And they were given pamphlets and paperwork. 4 years later, the child dies by suicide. The system had done some research, and they said, well, these cases demonstrate that there were problems in the home. The family weren't getting along. There was a lot of arguing. And the parents got angry and said, Of course, there were issues in the home. We waited 4 years. What did you expect? Where were you in those 4 years? I think we have to look at everything. We can't just run with statements. If you don't treat your child, then your child will die by suicide. It's a terrible thing to say to parents. I don't agree with that. I think we have to behave ethically as professionals. We have to do better.
Okay. Michael, you okay? Any follow-up? Are you good?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments before I make a comment about the chicken and the egg? If you got another comment, now's the time to bring it up. All right, Susan. Good job, Susan. You beat me to the punch. Go ahead.
If I say any of the wrong words, I hope you'll forgive me. It was an incredible presentation. I probably won't remember it all, so I'm really glad you're going to record it. But I wonder about laws that are being passed that are preventing. I know you're saying there's a lot of things we don't know, but of the things that we do know, some legislators are stopping doctors from giving services they think will help people. And I was wondering if you could speak to that and what we really should be, what should be our advocacy on that. Should we say, well, if you're just let us have the clinical trials, then at least let us do that. Don't stop it altogether. So hopefully I asked that okay.
Thank you, Susan. All right.
Well, I am concerned about that. I don't think doctors should be sent to prison. I think that's terrible. I don't think stopping trans care is the answer. Trans people are not going away. We're here, and the persisters will continue to be birthed and brought into the world. They will continue to persist, and we need a good model of care. And if it means we have these studies involving, where we enlist these children in research, it's not going to hurt. It will inform research. It will inform us. We'll know what to do. We'll be better informed and what not to do. And I am concerned also that this could possibly swing in the direction that none of us want. There have been some concerns expressed by a number of us. What will this do? Is this going to stop the trajectory of trans care? I'm not in favor of that at all. Even with those of us who have expressed concerns with what some of the research has shown, I don't think any of us would stop anything for the way we've been doing. Mental health care will continue. The therapists will continue to see trans children. And I think that even some of these people are trans themselves have raised concerns. And I think, again, I will say it, we need more research. We need to pay attention to what they're reporting and look at that and be open to information, updates, and also speak up and speak out if it appears that we are going to be denied services, because that was never something that any of us would want. And if that is the case, I'm deeply disappointed, because as I said, we're not going away. We're here.
David.
Yeah, I had question, you said at the beginning of your talk that about 2% of people identify as transgender. I've seen different numbers. I've seen lower numbers.
Intersex.
Intersex, okay.
And some of those
Um,
people don't identify as transgender.
Right, right,
Yeah.
okay. The numbers that I'm familiar with, and again, you know, they fluctuate depending on who you're looking at, et cetera, closer to 1% or even a little less than 1% who identify as transgender one way or the other. And my question is, as far as youth that we're talking about, who might be eligible for transition treatment, there's going to be a certain percentage who aren't going to get the treatment, perhaps because it wasn't available and they would have taken advantage were it available. There's also going to be a certain number who aren't going to be eligible because of medical problems and they can't take the hormones or the treatment. And there will be some who will say, that's not what I want to do. So my question is, and you know, as close as you might be able to come to this, how many adolescents are we talking about? How many transgender or intersexual adolescents are we talking about who may actually be in a situation where giving these puberty blockers is actually going to be the recommended situation? You know, is that a much larger number or a much smaller number relative to the numbers who are identified as intersexual?
The numbers have grown, and I want to just clarify something. I included the intersex population. A number of them do not identify with the trans community at all. And I don't have those percentages of the ones who do. The population under the trans umbrella, which would mean the transgender individuals along with the gender diverse individuals, and maybe some of them are intersex. I won't know that unless they make that statement. And then they're not under the trans umbrella necessarily because of that identity as much as they have taken on the other identities of trans and gender diverse. We do know, and I have to look because I contributed to research to a chapter, and just give me a moment and I will tell you in just a moment. I will give you some numbers, not in terms of the actual population, but I'll give you numbers, dollar numbers. So the high costs, I'm reading my own stuff here, so just bear with me. This is translated. High costs may hamper gender affirming surgery. This is for surgery and is on demand. Its projected value for 2032 in USD dollars is 1.9 billion. In Europe, it's estimated to rise above 482 million. But you have to remember that we are comparing healthcare. It's as if we're comparing apples and oranges. We're very, very costly here. Things are expensive. You have to pay a lot for care. If you want to live, you have to pay a lot. I mean, that's the bottom line.
All
We
right.
pay a lot for healthcare. And it went on to say that the market index shows an 11% growth from 2020 to 2021 for gender affirming surgery. Now, it's not care, it's surgery. with revenue reported as $1.9 billion. Which is quite a bit. It's quite a bit of money. As far as the numbers, I don't have those, David.
Okay. I appreciate your comments and excuse me, and I appreciate all of the questions, and we're running out of time. In fact, we're just about out of time, but I did say I would make two small brief comments relative to the chicken and the egg. So the chicken and the egg are in bed together. The chicken and the egg have spent an afternoon of wondrous, intimate delight. The chicken and the egg are now done with their activities. The chicken is smoking a cigarette, sipping a glass of wine, enjoying every moment of just what happened. The egg looks over to the chicken and says, arms crossed, assuming that egg has arms, I guess we know the answer to that question. Okay, that's one chicken and egg story. Now, the next thing I want to share with you is from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who suggests what came first, the chicken or the egg? It's an age-old question. And he unequivocally says the chicken came first, because the chicken and another species not the chicken, but two different species of birds got together and created a brand new egg that we later became to call a chicken. All right. So at some point in our heritage, there was no chicken, but other species got together and then did their thing, sort of like the story in the chicken, the egg in bed. They got together and created something that didn't exist before. So the chicken came before the egg, at least according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and which I think makes sense to me.
But we still don't miss your point. It's well taken.
Right. Okay. Right. I'm not. No. On gets that.
He just does that occasionally.
That's all right. I have fun with stories, so I get it.
All right. All right. So On, thank you very much. If you want to unmute your mics, this is a good time to say thank you to On. On, I appreciate all of your insights, your wisdom, and your willingness to share with us what you have to offer us on a very controversial subject. And I'm also very pleased that there were no interruptions tonight. I was a little concerned about that, but there were no uncivil interruptions at all. I want to also remind. Go ahead. Oh, I want to remind you that next month we have some comedy. We have Seth Andrews, who is the thinking atheist, who is, the main event is going to be Seth Andrews versus God, and he's going to describe who is the better intelligent designer, Seth or God. So I look forward to that next month, May 20th. All of our information is on fcfs.org, our website. Our YouTube channel can be located on our website as well. So I appreciate everybody. Thank you, On. Thank you, Lance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank
All
you.
right.
Very informative. Thank you.
Good night, all.
Take care. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.